This is part 2 for an in-depth private investigator tutorial on background checks. If you remember, in part 1, we started following a woman's criminal history in the state of Florida in 2014, and we brought it through a couple of different crimes of starting with just a theft, just a basic shoplifting type thing, and then into heroin possession. As we see, the basic theft starting with the way a lot of drug addicts do, having to support their habit. Then you're starting to see these drug charges come into play. This second part of the training, we're going to look at further her descent. Let's go back to where we were. If you remember, we left off kind of wondering how the woman on the left here, the 30-year-old picture of our subject, could in a mere 4 years, at 34 years old, look like the woman on the right. This is the same exact woman. Let's go back to the criminal index, the county level. We're looking at the criminal index, and we know here these crimes at the bottom are the earlier crimes. We've looked at this 2014 misdemeanor theft. We've kind of skipped over the traffic infractions because that's not what we're so much interested in for this particular training. We've looked at this felony in 2015, which was the possession of heroin. There are some other minor misdemeanors through 2016, some other traffic infractions, and we remember her license got pulled for a year, so I wouldn't be surprised if some of these were driving without a license or operating a motor vehicle without a license, that type of thing. But if we come back here into 2018, moving forward, we can see some misdemeanors. If we click on one of these, like right here, that will take us to the case information. From there, we click on the docket. We can look for any documents in there we're interested in. And specifically at this point, you understand a very important document that a lot of times the clients are very interested in is the affidavit for probable cause. Let's click and take a look at that. But first, let me show you her notice to appear or her arrest information sheet. The reason I want to show you this first is because of the detailed information available about your subject here that you're not going to find in almost any other source. Again, I've redacted a lot of this information. The only thing that they redacted was a social security number on a background check. That's not a hard thing to come up with. You've probably come up with it for your subject anyways. But on this particular misdemeanor, we have the address of the arrest, all these types of things. Again, white female, born in 1984, 5'2", 100 pounds, blue eyes and brown hair, light complexion, thin. Religion, she's listed as unknown. But here is scars, marks, and tattoos, which is just something you're going to be hard-pressed to come up with anywhere else. A tattoo on her lower legs / a butterfly. She gave her address as homeless. And if you recall, she previously submitted an address because of the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. She was carrying probably that driver's license with her, or they were able to look her up. But with the revocation of the license, now you can see the address source is verbal. She just told the officers that she's homeless. That may or may not be true. A lot of people say they're homeless just to keep from giving up their home address. Again, I don't want you to miss how important it is. Her place of birth is Georgia. We're in Florida now, and that explains, in my view, why the criminal history starts at age 30. She probably arrived in her very late 20s or at the age of 30 in Florida. Most likely from Georgia, where she was born, but could have been from someplace else. But that tells me she probably arrived here in this county at about age 30. Really important if you're doing a background check and you need address history or looking for other criminal offenses. Finally, here on the arrest information sheet, we can see this particular charge is prostitution, not something that we were able to pick up just from the docket, which told us it was just a misdemeanor. But now we know specifically that it was prostitution, a very difficult charge to make. The way they were able to make it on her is using a undercover police sting operation. And I'm going to click over to the affidavit, which is going to give you some insight into that. Here we are with the affidavit for that prostitution charge. Again, at the top, your standard information. If I scroll down just a little bit here, here's the sworn statement by the officer and some insight into that sting operation. On Wednesday, a particular day of 2018, at about 3:01 p.m., members of the West Palm Beach Police Department Community Response Team, that's the CRT, conducted an undercover operation to curb prostitution within the city of West Palm Beach. Officer so-and-so was the undercover playing a quote-unquote John or customer. Undercover officer was driving a black in color Kia Spectra. The UC, the undercover UC, made contact with a white female, our subject with the exact date of birth there in 1984. She was standing in the area of 56th Street and Broadway Avenue. The UC asked our subject if she was looking for a ride. The subject said yes and immediately got into the vehicle. The UC advised he wanted oral sex. The subject agreed to perform oral sex in exchange for $20. The subject agreed with a hand gesture. A traffic stop was conducted on the vehicle at a certain address, in front of a certain address on Greenwood Avenue. Notice, by the way, some of the common myths of prostitution. You don't have to, the policeman doesn't have to tell you if he's an undercover officer. If you ask him, he's the one that first mentioned a sexual act, not her. So she didn't agree necessarily with words, but she made a hand gesture. So all these attempts to be sneaky and smarter than the cops and to avoid getting busted, they don't necessarily work. If the cops are looking to catch a person in particular for a crime, they're usually pretty proficient at being able to do it because they know the law really, really well. Over time, the bad guys learn it too. But let's face it, in order to conduct criminal business, a certain amount of communication has to take place, and much of that is against the law. So the undercover officer drove away with the subject after making these arrangements, and then coincidentally there was a traffic stop. Of course, that was planned. We've talked a little bit about arrest information sheets. I want to show you the booking sheet, which is a little bit different. Here's the booking sheet from a different prostitution arrest a year later that she got picked up on. But just notice how the sheriff's paperwork is a little bit different, and some of the information is different. Much of it's the same, including the name that you have here for the subject that I've redacted, and physical description, those types of things. She does have an address listed here for some reason, whatever that address might be. Again, important for a background check. I don't know if our subject was actually arrested out of that particular sting or just given a summons to appear. I do know, however, that this booking sheet is from the next year, 2019, and she was arrested. If I scroll down to the bottom, she was picked up for failure to appear on a prostitution charge, which leads me to believe maybe she was just cited and released from the undercover sting that we were discussing, but then she ended up getting picked up about a year later. Notice again some of the details that you'll have here, a physical description, an address, that type of thing, which may be new for you. So there's a prostitution bust for her, the first of two different sting operations we're going to look at. Let's go back to the docket sheet again, and let's look at from these misdemeanors in 2018 up to this 2019 felony. This is not our first felony for her. She had that heroin possession charge. But we do have a felony here. Again, when you look here, you don't have any idea what it is. So again, if we click on this case number, that will bring us to case information. We click on the tab that says docket information and look for the documents we're interested in. And specifically, let's look at the booking sheet again for her. Here she is, again, the booking information. It looks very similar. All of these are going to kind of look the same to you because they're very standard forms filled out in the standard way with the same information. Look, when you pull up a different one for your subject, look for things like new addresses that you might have not known about before. But if we scroll to the bottom, we can find not those failure to appears for the misdemeanor prostitution, but we're finding for the first time what this felony charge is about: robbery with a weapon, vehicular theft, grand theft of a motor vehicle, battery, cause bodily harm. She's getting charged with some pretty heavy-duty stuff. How in the world does this arguably little gal, 5'2", 110 pounds, get caught up with committing robbery and vehicular theft and battery? Obviously, you know the answer to this, right? You should by heart know now. Go to the criminal affidavit of probable cause and find out the narrative. What happened? How in the world did this happen? So let's click over to that. Here's page 1. We know all this information. Notice, by the way, in this particular notice to appear, which is part of the criminal affidavit, you're going to see, look at this, tattoo right foot, tattoo right hip, tattoo right hip. So we got some more tattoos than on previous arrests. I don't know if they've just There's some certain amount of sloppiness sometimes. Sometimes they miss them, but she might be getting new tattoos. It's hard to say. She has discovered now that her religion is Catholic. I hope that's true. I'm a Catholic, and I hope that she goes to church and figures that out. Again, we have addresses for her new addresses where it happened, and the more specific charges as well with criminal code information beside them. Let's go and click on page 2. Now we're finding some of that narrative information. We're going to scroll down. At this point, you know what's on the top. The narrative reads, the following occurred in Palm Beach County, Florida, in the city of Riviera Beach. Officer so-and-so was patrolling in the 1700 block of Avenue L at approximately 1:30 in the morning when the city tag reader alerted that a vehicle, which was taken in an armed carjacking earlier in the previous morning, there's the case number, entered the city at 1st Street and President Barack Obama Highway. Okay, boy, notice automated tag reader. It's set up somewhere. It probably is not in a car or with an officer, that type of thing. There's a tag reader. And this is more and more common where cities have these tag readers as you come in and out of a city. Your license plate number is scanned. In this case, this tag number alerted that it was a stolen vehicle out of a carjacking, an armed carjacking at that. And immediately that information was sent to patrol officers. The affidavit goes on to say, and remember, this is a sworn statement by the officer. Officer so-and-so notified units of the vehicle over Channel A on his department-issued radio and began to head towards the area where the vehicle entered the city. Officer so-and-so was traveling southbound when he saw the carjacking vehicle pass him going northbound in the 1600 block. I'm going to scroll down a little bit more. Officer so-and-so attempted to catch up with the vehicle and initiate a felony traffic stop when other units were able to get in the area. So he was going to try to catch up with the vehicle, but also, it says, try to wait until other officers were around. Obviously, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that when you stop a rolling stolen vehicle, a very good chance the driver and passengers are going to bail. You got some tough decisions to make at that point. Of course, always concentrate on the driver, really, unless there's some extraordinary exigent circumstances to go on somebody else, but the driver's who you really want. Officer so-and-so then observed the vehicle run a red light at Blue Herring and President Barack Obama Highway in an attempt to elude the officer. Officer activated his lights and sirens on his department-issued vehicle in an attempt to stop the vehicle. And then it goes on to describe turn by turn as this car tried to evade him, going even as much as approximately 80 miles per hour. The officer goes on to say it was done with a complete disregard for all traffic laws. The vehicle and its occupants came to a final resting point at a certain address or in front of a certain address on Bayberry Drive, where a total of 4 people exited the vehicle. The driver of the vehicle, later identified as the driver, a black male born in 1976 who was wearing a black shirt and light-colored shorts, exited the driver's seat and ran eastbound on Bayberry, where he was apprehended. One short sentence, a lot of drama. Who knows how that happened, what was said, what was done. And I'm not at all insinuating anything wrong, but I'm just saying a lot happens in one sentence. Let's take a look at the next page. Oh, there's the end of the sentence. He was apprehended a short time after. Boy, there's, again, 4 words. If you work loss prevention, if you've ever made apprehensions, citizen's arrest, if you worked in law enforcement, which I have not worked in law enforcement, but making arrest, then you know a short time after. A lot of things happen in that short time after. The back passenger exited the vehicle from the rear side, was later identified as another passenger, black male born in 70. He was also apprehended shortly after. Front passenger, who was a white female, later identified as our subject, again born in 84, exited the vehicle from the driver's side door and was also apprehended. The 4th person, an unknown white male, last seen running northbound, is still at large. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. All 3 subjects that were apprehended were transported to St. Mary's Medical Center for medical clearance. All 3 were transported back to the police station for processing. It should be noted that one of the subjects had an active warrant for his arrest, and there's a case number associated with that if you wanted to tug on that thread to unravel more about these known associates she's riding around in a stolen car with. Another subject also had 3 our subject had 3 active warrants for her arrest. There's the case number associated with those cases. All 3 suspects that were apprehended were charged with resisting officers without violence. That's for the fleeing in the car. And 2 of the subjects were charged with trespassing in a conveyance for being passengers in the vehicle. The driver was also charged with fleeing to elude and grand theft auto, being that he was the driver of the vehicle during a pursuit. Let it be noted that the 3 individuals that were taken into custody also matched the subjects' descriptions of the original 3 suspects that committed the carjacking earlier the previous morning. There's a case number for that. So it's not like one guy stole this car and then picked up his buddies. This is, everybody that they caught was involved in that carjacking to one degree or another. Officer so-and-so made contact with the victim of the carjacking incident, and here's where you have the victim's name, who responded to the station where he was presented with a photo array and was able to positively identify all the subjects as the 3 subjects that originally stole the vehicle from him at knife point in the 1100 block of 9th Street. Based on this investigation, everybody's getting charged, and the vehicle was towed to a private impound lot after it was searched and inventoried by the police. So can you take a guess on the outcome of this case? She has been charged repeatedly, convicted repeatedly of different things, and now you have a case where the victim has identified her, the police have caught her in the stolen vehicle. Pretty open and shut case. What do you think happened? If you're saying to yourself, for sure guilty, this is a very strong case, no doubt, you got a good case you can make for that. I mean, also you've got accomplices. And a lot of times you're going to find where one or more people is willing to turn on the other one. And they'll maybe admit to a small thing, but say, no, the other guy really did it. So that's a nice little thread to pull on for the police detectives to try to put this together, the prosecuting attorney's office. On the other hand, if a person wants to take something to trial, man, you can never predict a jury, right? So let's take a look and see what actually happened with this case. There's a big part of me that hopes you are yelling at the screen saying, Larry, there's a lot of things that can happen besides pleading guilty or being found guilty by a jury or being acquitted by a jury at trial. There are so many stages in between where a case can fall apart. And that's the case here. In the court system, there's just a variety of things that happen. If we go back to that, the docket, and then come forward through some of the documents, we can find that a motion was filed to drop the charges, to have the charges withdrawn. And this document right here shows the judge granting the motion to have the charges withdrawn. So why in the world were they withdrawn after all of this that went on, the car chase and everything else? Well, with a little bit more digging in those documents, we can discover that the court says, yes, there was probable cause to make the arrest. There certainly was a crime committed, but they didn't have enough evidence to prosecute. And specifically, they were unsuccessful in getting in contact with the victim. Now, I would love to speculate wildly as to why they were having making contact with the victim of this crime. If you or I were a victim of armed carjacking, we would certainly pursue it. Think about some of the things that could be in play here, though. For one, he may feel threatened. Maybe that they've made one of the people involved in this has made some threats against the victim. Maybe he was involved in something shady when the car was taken from him, and he doesn't want to pursue it because he's embarrassed by whatever was going on or that type of thing. Maybe he's quite honestly just traumatized by it, doesn't want to go another step on his own. Maybe he's moved out of town, gotten a better job, something like that. There's all sorts of reasons on the scale from shady to legit and all the shades in between. I will give the benefit of the doubt to the victim and say that, he just, for whatever reason, did not want to pursue these charges. So there you have it, starting with just a name, almost nothing. We're able to bring that forward to unravel a good stretch of life in this poor woman's world, in her life, that just shows that descent downward with the drugs and the things that come with it, the people you hang out with and the things you can get caught up in. If you're wondering where she is now and how she's doing in 2020, well, let's go back to the docket and take a look. We can see here that after this 2019 felony, and who knows how much time, we know that she got jammed up for a long time before on the theft, spending a lot of time in jail. Who knows how long she was in jail while this felony carjacking got worked out. But we do know that she got hit with another misdemeanor and a traffic infraction later in 2019. And then here in 2020, the latest offense, a misdemeanor. If we click on that, we can wheel our way into the affidavit that explains what happens. First thing we're going to look at as we scroll down through here. By the way, I will point out on this particular affidavit, notice here aliases, a bunch of aliases that I've had to redact. They've shown up in bits and pieces in other records we've looked at, but this is the first time I'm really pointing it out to you. She's got a lot of aliases, including the street name she goes by. A super handy thing to do, to know when you're doing a background check, or if you have to pretext or make contact with her or a family member. So scrolling down, this 2020 charge was back to prostitution for her. Let's go over to page 2, because if you remember, I did make you a promise about 2 undercover sting operations and the different results they had. Let's go take a look at page 2. Right here is the narrative on this second prostitution charge that we're looking at. And it is another sting operation. Remember, the first one ended up with her being in the vehicle with the undercover officer. They did a pretext traffic stop and probably cited her on the spot, so she knew what had happened. Maybe arrested her, but probably, I'm guessing they just cited her. Here in this sting operation, let's take a look at this. On such and such a day in 2020, units of the Special Investigation Division, the SID, notice that's a different division that was running the sting earlier. The SID conducted a prostitution operation to suppress prostitution in the city of West Palm Beach. The operation was geared towards curbing the ongoing quality of life issues prostitution brings to the area. I don't know that I would particularly add that in a criminal affidavit, but they did. And notice the wording's a little bit different than when the other division did it. Just little differences, little things that are different in the world. It goes on to say the area of focus was the Broadway corridor. Undercover male officers were utilized as following. At 1:42 in the afternoon, undercover detective so-and-so observed a known prostitute, our subject with the 1984 date of birth, wearing a pink tank top and jean shorts. She was sitting in the 600 block of 54th Street in the city of West Palm Beach. The UC was driving a department-issued undercover vehicle, undisclosed undercover vehicle. They're not going to release that here, and there's no reason for them to. Upon the undercover officer bringing his vehicle to a stop, the subject stood up and walked over to the vehicle. She initiated, in a sense. I mean, he stopped, but she came over to him. The UC stated he wanted sex. The subject agreed by nodding her head yes. Now, she had tried this nonverbal consent before, and it didn't help her, but she's trying it again. The UC then asked how much he needed so he could go get it from the bank, at which point the subject said $40. The subject told the UC to go to the ATM located inside the store that's on the corner and directly across the street. The UC agreed, at which point the subject began to walk to the store and the undercover officer left the area. Okay, heads up here. Another interesting thing is coming up for you. The transaction was audio and video recorded. No surprise there. However, check this out. The officer swearing out this affidavit says, I was able to watch the subject on the city camera system. I never lost sight of the subject and was able to easily identify her. So they were using a variety of resources, no matter how much you're looking around to see if the cops are around, if you're being followed. There are cameras everywhere now. Detectives in the area, immediately following the deal, made contact with the subject to verify her identification. A field contact was completed on their encounter with the subject for documentation purposes. And now this is very interesting. Was she cited? No. Was she arrested? No. Why not? They had everything they needed. The affidavit goes on to explain the subject was not arrested on the scene due to a larger investigation being conducted in the area. Rather, probable cause was written for arrest at a future date. In other words, they didn't want to tip their hand. Now, she may be savvy enough to figure out what a coincidence that my John didn't show up and these cops are here. Or maybe she thinks he got scared off when he saw the cops. But notice, there's not immediate clear indication on the street that they're doing this undercover operation. And so it's going to be easier for them to continue and then charge her at a later date. Everything that we used here in this example for background check, a deep background check, is available to you out there. No restrictions, nothing like that needed. You don't need to have your license even to do this. You don't have to have access to those restricted databases. Everything you need to do an investigation like we've just done here unraveling the course of this poor, unfortunate woman's downfall over time. This was not paid databases. This is not something only a licensed private investigator can do. It's open source intelligence. It's available to you. You need to learn more about these types of things. My book, 51 Weird Private Investigator Tricks That Actually Works, would be something that you're interested in. In it, I have a chapter with 9 sources and methods. I think you're going to find some that are new for you, and they're all going to be very interesting and helpful. Finally, just don't miss how unfortunate it is that this poor woman's life unraveled like this. She is a person, a human being. And again, if you got a spot on your prayer list, be sure to drop our subject in there. I'm sure she could use it. In the meantime, this is Larry Kaye with ShadowAnyone.com. Remember, do the right thing, even if it's the hard thing.